I never imagined myself in this situation. I never saw the signs, or maybe I just didn't want to. But there I was, pinned against the old oak tree in my own backyard, the summer sun burning down, my breath short and shallow. His hands were everywhere, and I couldn't push him away. I didn't want to. How did it come to this? I had always been the doting aunt, the one who bought him his first bike, cheered him on at his football games, and listened to his teenage rants about his parents. I loved him like my own, but this was something else. It all started a few months ago when Ryan moved in. My sister's divorce had hit him hard, and he needed a place to stay while he figured things out. He was 20, with a body sculpted from years of sports, and a smile that could melt the coldest of hearts. My husband was often away on business trips, and I was happy to have some company. Or so I thought. Ryan was always respectful, always kind, but I noticed things changing. The lingering looks that lasted a second too long, the way his fingers would brush against mine when he handed me a cup, the way he'd find reasons to be near me, to touch me. I told myself it was innocent, that I was imagining things. But one evening, as the sun set and the world quieted, he kissed me. It was quick, a fleeting press of lips that left me stunned and breathless. I pulled back, confusion and guilt swirling inside me. He apologized, said it was a mistake, thought that he'd had too much to drink. I wanted to believe him. I told myself it would never happen again. I was wrong. A few days later, I found myself thinking about that kiss more than I should. I'd replay it in my mind, wondering if there was something I'd missed, something more behind it. I began to notice how he looked at me, with an intensity that made my heart race. I'd catch him watching me from across the room, his eyes dark and unreadable. It was as if an unspoken tension was building between us, something neither of us dared to acknowledge. One night, after my husband had called to say he'd be away for another week, Ryan and I shared a bottle of wine on the porch. The air was thick with humidity, the cicadas buzzing in the distance. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily between us. But there was an underlying current, a charged energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. His leg brushed against mine under the table, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. I didn't move away. Neither did he. When I looked into his eyes, I saw a reflection of my own desire, raw and unchecked. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. The line we were never supposed to cross had blurred, and I was teetering on the edge, dangerously close to falling. The days that followed were a blur of tension and stolen glances. Ryan avoided me, and I avoided him, but the energy between us was undeniable, a charged undercurrent that pulled us together despite ourselves. I should have told him to leave, to go back to his mother's house, but I didn't. A part of me didn't want him to go. One afternoon, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the ceiling fan. I called out for Ryan, but there was no answer. As I made my way to the backyard, I saw him. He was shirtless, sweat glistening on his toned body as he worked on the garden. I stood there, hidden by the curtain, my eyes tracing the muscles in his back, the way his jeans hung low on his hips. I felt a heat rise within me, a forbidden desire that made my heart race. I stepped outside, and he turned to face me. There was something in his eyes, a hunger that mirrored my own. "Aunt Julia," he said, his voice low and thick. "We need to talk." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "What happened the other night?" He began, but I cut him off. "It was a mistake," I said quickly. We shouldn't." He moved closer, so close I could feel his breath on my skin. "But you want to?" he whispered. His hand brushed against my arm, sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but my body betrayed me. I closed the gap between us, my hand resting on his chest. "Ryan," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is wrong." "Then why does it feel so right?" he asked, his lips brushing against my ear. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The air was thick with anticipation as we stood in the backyard, the world around us fading into a blur. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, feel the blood rushing through my veins. Ryan's hands slid down my arms, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. I was trapped between desire and morality, but the pull was too strong, too overwhelming. His lips met mine in a slow, deliberate kiss, soft at first, testing the waters. I melted into him, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. His tongue traced the seam of my lips, and I parted them, allowing him in. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate. I could taste the faint hint of salt on his lips, feel the tension in his body as he held back. His hands traveled down my back, gripping my waist and pulling me against him. I could feel the hard planes of his chest pressed against mine, the heat of his body searing into my skin. I arched into him, wanting more, needing more. His lips left mine, trailing hot kisses down my neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin. I gasped, my nails digging into his shoulders as his hands moved lower, tracing the curve of my hips, slipping under my shirt. His touch was electric, sending jolts of pleasure through my body. I let out a soft moan, my head falling back as he kissed along my collarbone, his hands inching higher, pushing my shirt up. He paused, his breath hot against my skin. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice husky with desire. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I nodded, my fingers curling into his hair. He took that as all the permission he needed, his lips capturing mine once again in a searing kiss. His hands moved to my breasts, cupping them, his thumbs brushing over my nipples. A jolt of pleasure shot through me, and I arched into his touch, wanting more, needing more. He backed me up against the old oak tree, his body pressing against mine, pinning me in place. His mouth moved lower, trailing kisses down my chest, his hands sliding down to my thighs, lifting me up. I wrapped my legs around his waist, feeling the hard press of him against me, the friction sending sparks of pleasure through my body. He moved against me, his hips grinding into mine, his lips finding mine once again. The world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us, lost in the heat of the moment. I didn't care about the consequences, about the guilt or the shame. All I cared about was him, about the way he made me feel, alive and wanted, in a way I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, as we moved together, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I awoke to a crushing weight of guilt and shame. The sun streamed through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I rolled over, expecting to find Ryan beside me, but the bed was empty. Panic set in, my heart racing as I sat up, my mind replaying the events of the previous day. What had I done? I buried my face in my hands, tears streaming down my cheeks. I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I had betrayed my sister, my husband, and myself. I had let my desires cloud my judgment, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I stumbled out of bed, throwing on a robe as I made my way downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I called out for Ryan, my voice shaky and uncertain. There was no answer. I searched the house, my panic growing with each empty room. Finally, I found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Ryan's messy scrawl. "I'm sorry, Aunt Julia. I can't stay here anymore. I need to figure things out. Please don't hate me." I sank to the floor, the note crumpled in my hand. He was gone. I had driven him away, ruined everything with my reckless actions. I knew I had to face the consequences, to deal with the fallout of my choices, but I wasn't sure if I was strong enough. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing from Ryan. I tried to carry on with my life, to pretend that everything was normal, but the guilt ate away at me. I avoided my sister, afraid she would see the truth in my eyes. I avoided my husband, afraid he would sense the change in me. I was a shell of myself, lost and alone. One evening, as I sat on the porch, staring out at the backyard, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Ryan. "I'm sorry for everything. I just needed some time. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if I was ready to face him, to face the truth of what we had done, but I knew I couldn't run forever. I had to confront my actions, to deal with the consequences of my choices. I took a deep breath and typed out a reply. Yes, let's talk. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to face it head on. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to take the first step.